Steve Bowers welcoming you to Dialogue here at E+ TV6, a conversation with Ricky Long, who's the historian in Madison County, key of Madison County history. On Facebook, he has a site called Today in Madison County.
Today in Madison County History.
And it's valuable. He posts every day things that happen on that specific date in the history of this county. So it's a very, very valuable source of insight and interesting information. So be sure to check that on Facebook, Today in Madison County, Tennessee History.
Correct.
How long have you been doing that?
Been doing that for just over 2 years now.
Okay. Are you surprised at what you're finding?
I am surprised in a number of ways. For one thing, I found that there's nothing new under the sun, Steve.
Okay.
Every time we see or hear something in the news that people say this has never happened before, yes, it has.
And it's happened right here.
You just don't remember it.
Okay.
I'm surprised at some of the big events that have involved this town that some of us didn't know about.
Okay, such as?
Well, you and I were talking about one earlier, that in the late 1920s, a small-time bootlegger was arrested and held 60 days in the Madison County Jail. His name was George Barnes at the time. Just a few years later, he dropped the Barnes and began going by George Kelly.
Kelly, okay.
And he is the infamous Machine Gun Kelly, who was one of J. Edgar Hoover's first major arrests.
Okay, and so he spent 60 days.
He spent 60 days as a resident of Madison County.
You said they found, what, 40 bottles of whiskey in his trunk?
40 bottles of whiskey in the trunk, and he had no idea how they had gotten there.
Said he'd loaned the car to somebody.
He had loaned the car to a man he'd only met once, who by that point had already bailed out, bonded out, and disappeared, so he wasn't there to defend himself.
Okay. You say he also mentioned that he had a wife and child in Memphis.
He did say at the time that he had a wife and child in Memphis. Now, when he was arrested a few years later as Machine Gun Kelly, that former wife who had divorced him for desertion had no idea that her husband, George Barnes, and Machine Gun Kelly, the infamous gangster, were the same person.
Okay. So, wow.
So he was a resident of Jackson for a brief time.
So you never know who you're going to run into that's already been to Jackson, Tennessee. Right. So the stories will never end.
You know, some of the things that we find, I can remember finding one, it was last year. It was during the time that they were having riots in Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis, and they were parts of downtown were burning. And this was a speech that a politician had made, and he said, we used to be able to agree to disagree in this country. And he said, it seems like today, whenever anybody doesn't agree with you, you start a riot in the street and set fires and destroy things. And it would have sounded like something being said in 2000. Today. It was actually Senator Bill Brock, and it was 1970 when he made that speech in Jackson, Tennessee. So most of the things that I think that happen today, there are variations, but there's nothing really new happening under the sun, I don't believe.
Ricky Long with us, Madison County historian. One reason I wanted to talk to you, a segment of our history that many of us don't know anything about has to do with African-American history, black history in the city of Jackson. When you think about black individuals that are well known in our history, Bishop Lane immediately comes to mind.
Right.
I was familiar with I.H. Anderson because he had a building at the corner of Shannon and Lafayette.
The CME Publishing Company.
Yeah, that was there until the tornadoes of 2003. And the radio station, 101.5, they had bought that building and moved into that building right before the tornado hit. And so I was aware of the significance of that building. It had Egyptian motif ironwork and
beautiful building
and all, and it was 2 blocks off Court Square. So obviously in those days, there was a segment of the black community that had thrived, was doing well commercially and business and everything else all along that west corridor of Shannon and Lafayette, right through there.
Right.
And so those people I know, but you said there are other people in the city's history.
There are a few that I would like to talk about today. One of them being Isaac Lane, and I really want to save him for last because I want to save the best for last.
All right.
A couple of the others are ones that are not as well known, but that played an important role in Jackson's history, and I think deserve to be remembered. 4 very different men, 4 very different stories. The first one was a man named George Washington Burney Jr., B-U-R-N-E-Y.
Okay.
Just a couple of years ago, quite by accident, I met his great-great-niece who had come here from Nebraska. She was researching at the Tennessee room of the library, and she had come here to research her Burney family ancestors in Jackson. Her great-great-grandfather was a CME church minister. He was a traveling companion of Isaac Lane's. He was the preacher at St. Paul CME Church on Lane Avenue at the corner of Middleton Street. His son, George Jr., and another son named John had enlisted in the U.S. Army during World War I. And of course, we had a segregated army at that time. So they were in an all-black unit, the 368th Infantry Unit. That unit's sister unit was the 367th, that are pretty well known as the Harlem Hellfighters. So the 368th was an all-black unit. It was made up mostly of men from either West Tennessee or the inner city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I can't imagine what it was like getting those two groups together. But when they were sent to France, they fought under French officers because the white American officers didn't see the need for black soldiers in their army.
Interesting.
So they were fighting under French command. They fought in the Meuse-Argonne offensive, some of them quite heroically. And we have news clippings that say that George Burney Jr. was awarded the French Croix de Guerre, the French War Cross, which is the second highest award the French government gives. The newspaper clipping said that he had used his service pistol to shoot down 2 German airplanes and take 30 German soldiers prisoner.
Kind of an Alvin York type story.
A black version of Alvin York is what I jokingly told Miss Rhonda, his niece. He came home to America in the spring of 1919 with the end of the war. He was living by then in East St. Louis, although all of his family lived in Jackson. He had grown up here and lived all of his life here. He went home to the woman that he thought was his wife, and turned out a domestic incident occurred that involved another man, and George Burney was shot and killed 7 days after getting home as a war hero.
Wow.
Rhonda Williams knew the story because her grandfather was the nephew that went to Illinois and brought his body home for burial in Jackson.
So he's buried in Jackson?
He's buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery on East Forest Street. But he had never had a marked grave. His parents are both assumed to be buried there. The only other marked grave in the family was a child who was his sister. And so with her help last year, we applied for and received a U.S. government memorial tombstone. And in August of 2024, we held a memorial service at Mount Olivet Cemetery and dedicated a tombstone to then Corporal George Burney Jr. of Jackson, Tennessee. The color guard fired the salute. They played taps. They had the ringing of the bell. They folded the flag and presented it to the family. He finally got the due recognition that he should have gotten over 100 years earlier.
His family, you say she came here from Kansas, Nebraska?
She's from Nebraska. She also had family with her from Milwaukee. There was family from California who didn't get to come. There was a young man from Jackson named Jeremy Miles, who is a minister in the CME Church, who is a descendant. He did the prayer that day. So there were a number of family members here that day, most of whom had never met each other until that day at the cemetery.
What a special moment.
It was a wonderful
and his name again,
George? George Washington Burney Jr. There were in that unit over 20 men from Madison County who served, 2 who were killed in action. Bill Trice is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and Savannah Williamson is buried in Lorraine, France, in a U.S. military cemetery there. They were both Madison Countyans who were killed in action in that same unit.
Fascinating stuff. Stay where you are. We'll be right back with more dialogue here at E+ TV 6.
Eyes forward. Don't drive distracted.
Welcome back to Dialogue at E+ TV 6 and a visit with Ricky Long, who's the Official historian, Madison County, Tennessee, active with the West Tennessee Genealogical Society and more, and he publishes each day on Facebook, Today in Madison County, Tennessee History, where he picks up the date and things that happened in this county. He's been doing it for the last 2 years. It's a wealth of information, fun insights, sometimes sobering reminders of things. As he said, things really haven't changed, just names and dates, right? Same stuff goes round, round, and round. We talked about George Burney Jr. in one story. You said there are 3 other men that from the black community, African-American community in Jackson, you think we ought to know?
The second one that I wanted to mention is Dr. Miles Lynk. Dr. Lynk is fairly well known, not nearly as well known as he should be.
Okay.
He was born in 1871 in Brownsville. His parents were freed slaves. When Miles Lynk was 11, his father died, and he was the oldest son in the family, so he had to work to help his mother and siblings. But they were strong members, again, of the CME Church, and his mother insisted on Miles getting an education. By the time he was 13, he had passed the state teacher's exam that qualified him to be a school teacher, but they wouldn't hire him because he was too young. So he went on, and at age 19, graduated from Meharry Medical College as a physician.
Okay. So he's a school teacher at 13, a doctor at 19.
At 29, he also achieved a law degree, too.
Okay.
But he moved to Jackson and became the first black doctor in Jackson, Tennessee.
When did he move here?
He was in his 20s, so it would have been in the mid-1890s.
Okay.
He then saw that there was a need for black education, for black doctors. And so he founded the West Tennessee College, which was a medical school for black students here in Jackson, Tennessee.
I've never heard this.
It was here from 1901 to 1907, and in that year then, so that they could get better exposure, they moved to Memphis. It stayed in Memphis until 1924 when it closed due to lack of funds. But during that time, they graduated well over 200 black physicians.
So it was in Jackson from
1901 to 1907. And in fact,
where was it located?
It was located off of just about where we're sitting right now, just across the street, where the Berean Baptist Church building was, probably within a few hundred yards of the Civic Center on the other side of what's now South Island Avenue.
Any idea of the faculty or whatever that was at that school?
His wife also taught at the school. His first graduate was Bishop Isaac Lane's son. Dr. Lynk taught such classes as microscopy. He taught obstetrics. He taught surgery. His wife taught botany, chemistry, medical Latin, all classes that are clearly far over my head to be able to tell you anything about what they are.
So we had a black medical school here from 1901 to 1907. And the name of it again was?
The West Tennessee College.
West Tennessee College, okay.
Calvin,
did he stay with that school when it went to Memphis, or did he stay here?
He did stay with that school when it went to Memphis, and was still with that school at the time that it closed in 1924.
How long did he live then?
He lived until the 1950s. He's buried in Memphis. He published I had to write it down, the Medical and Surgical Observer. And he was one of the founders of the first black medical society in the United States. Now, he was also a historian and a prolific author. He wrote books such as The Black Troops or Daring Deeds of Negro Soldiers in the Spanish-American War. He wrote one called Lynk's Simplified System of Record Keeping for Busy People. And here's one that this was a published article that I'm sure would be some type of light reading for you and me. In 1944, he published an article titled The Atomic Bomb, Its Theoretical Construction and Possible Medical Uses.
Okay.
Dr. Lynk was quite a brilliant man.
Haywood County to Jackson, Tennessee?
To Jackson, Tennessee.
There you go, okay. That's the name I did not know, and I did not have any idea we'd had a black medical school.
There is a law professor in Arizona now who is named Miles Vandenhurst Lynk Jr., and I believe I was able to track down on the internet last night that he is Dr. Lynk's brother's grandson. So he's named after his great uncle.
So that medical legacy
And he
continues.
is an extremely well-known collegiate law professor.
Wow. Okay. All right, 2 down, 2 to go. Who else do you want to talk about?
The next one, very different story. A man named Matt Dyer. Matt was a slave. He came to Jackson, we don't know how early on, we don't know when he first arrived. By being named Dyer, I have an idea that he at one time belonged to Colonel Robert Dyer, because in the War of 1812, Matt went along with the troops led by Colonel Dyer as the chief cook. Okay. He then went to the Mexican War as a cook for the troops. And the Jackson newspapers at the outbreak of the Civil War, when the Confederate units were enlisted and recruited and marched away from Jackson, Matt Dyer suited up in full Confederate uniform and marched away with them to be their cook. And the newspapers said they called him Colonel Matt. And the newspapers said that we saw Colonel Matt Dyer marching away once again, and he said, yes, sir. We whipped them in those last 2 wars I fought in, and we'll whip them this time too. And off he went with the 6th Tennessee. At the end of the war, Matt came home. He, by this point, belonged to Judge Milton Brown.
Okay.
I don't know if he was freed before the emancipation of the slaves or not. And
Did he stay with the Confederate Army till the end of the war?
I do not know. At some point, I think that most of those men were probably sent home. Okay. Just because they couldn't protect them, they couldn't feed them, they couldn't care for them. Okay. You know, at the first of the war, that was really going to be easy. It was only going to take a few weeks. Yeah. But when the Republican Party, which was the radical party at the time, came into power in Tennessee, our governor was a man named Parson Brownlow from East Tennessee. He's widely recognized as being the most corrupt governor in the history of the state of Tennessee. And the Republican Party passed a law giving the vote to blacks. This is after emancipation. Right, okay. But they specified that blacks, while they could vote, could not hold office. And Matt Dyer published a letter that went out in newspapers all across the South, purportedly written to Governor Brownlow, where he said, thank you for giving blacks like me the vote, but why don't you think we're capable of holding office? And it was a quite pointed letter. Okay. And he announced himself as a candidate for the governorship of Tennessee. Now, I have an idea that Matt probably had some help writing the letter. Okay. And it would be easy to say that someone wrote the letter for him as a political stunt and signed his name to it, except for one thing, and this is from the Jackson Whig newspaper, and I want to read it to make sure it's read correctly. They wrote, it will be seen from the following letter that a colored citizen of this city, well and favorably known as Colonel Matt Dyer, has conditionally announced himself as a candidate for governor. In justice to our fellow citizen, Colonel Dyer, we may say that he has lived in Tennessee for over 40 years, and from his well-established character for honesty, he at an early day gained the confidence of his master, which secured him opportunities for self-improvement that but few others of his color had. He has been often sent off on important missions and trusted with the safekeeping of large sums of money. As a politician, he is well posted. As a speaker, he is highly entertaining and can hold a crowd for hours in the most rapturous applause. He is widely known and very popular. If we were betting men, we would stake our pile on the Colonel against Brownlow.
Hang on to that thought. We'll pick this story up right after this as we continue this dialogue on E+ TVC.
What this place needs is better graduation rates.
What this place needs is less childhood obesity.
What this place needs is free help with taxes.
What this place needs is healthy breakfasts.
What this place needs is fitness programs for kids.
What this place needs is early readers.
What this place needs is mentors for teens.
What this place needs is people to join us. What this place needs is you. To donate or volunteer, go to unitedway.org.
Welcome back to Dialogue at E Plus TV 6. Continuing a conversation with Ricky Long. We got Matt Dyer and Governor
Colonel
Brown.
Matt Dyer.
Colonel Matt Dyer and Brownlow, the gubernatorial election of 1867.
Correct.
Did he really mount a campaign?
I can't find any record that he did.
Okay.
He announced that he would. He did ask Governor Brownlow to debate him. He said, I'll debate you anytime, any place you're choosing. I don't think that ever happened.
Okay.
But Matt certainly put his name in the ring, he said, if allowed to run.
To run.
The problem was the
state law
as
said you
passed
couldn't.
said blacks could vote, but they
could not
couldn't hold
run.
office.
Okay.
And that eventually was changed.
What happened to him?
I don't know what eventually happened to Matt. The last record that we have of him, the Yancey House Hotel in Jackson had built a new hotel and restaurant. It was at the corner of Lafayette and Market Street, at the southwest corner of Market and Lafayette. They were advertising that they had opened a restaurant and that their cook was the famous Colonel Matt Dyer.
Okay.
So they were using him as their
Chef.
as their drawing card, because their advertisement said all of the Epicureans in West Tennessee certainly know the name of Colonel Matt Dyer and will want to eat in our restaurant where Matt and his wife were employed. And that's the last record that we know of him there. Now, at the same time, Matt had done one other thing. When you think about when the slaves were freed, most of them had extensive skills. They were blacksmiths, they were carpenters, they were wheelwrights. But they had never had the opportunity to apply for their own jobs, to seek their own employment, to deal with the business end of that other than the work involved. Matt Dyer opened an employment agency, and he announced in the local papers that any freed slaves who are looking for employment, if they will come to me, I will help them find positions.
Wow.
Now, my feeling on this is probably that Matt had the connections, that Matt probably knew people, just as today, if you filled out a resume, you're going to be asked for references.
Right.
Because they want to talk to people who know you and know the quality of your work and the quality of your character. And I think that what was probably happening was that employers knew Matt Dyer, and if Matt Dyer came and said, this man is a skilled worker, this man will make you a good employee, you need to hire this man, then that carried weight.
He was personnel placement.
So Matt was a personnel placement officer as well as being the chef at the Yancey Hotel, the last record that we have of him. Wow. He was by then probably in his 70s, so we really don't know what became of him after that.
But fascinating story.
Fascinating story. And he had a good name. You know, this was a world where Matt wasn't allowed to have much else.
Yeah.
But Proverbs says a good name is valued above gold and silver, and Matt Dyer had a good name.
Right. You want to tell us a little bit about Bishop Lane?
Bishop Isaac Lane, as far as I'm concerned, Steve, was the greatest man to ever live in this town. Isaac Lane, again, was born a slave in East Madison County on the Cullen Lane plantation. He grew up there. He did tell later in life that Cullen Lane, the owner and master, was actually his father as well. Isaac Lane said, I only stole one thing in my life. He stole a blueback speller when he was a little boy and taught himself to read and write, which was illegal at the time for slaves to be able to read and write. So as he was plowing, he would practice making letters and writing words in the dust and learn to read and write. He married in the 1850s. He always went to church with the Lane family. Cullen Lane insisted on his slaves going to church with him. He became a Christian and became a minister.
Yeah, they call him an exhorter, right?
He was an exhorter, even before he was freed as a slave.
Right.
He was already a minister. And he had gotten encouragement from white ministers to become an exhorter and to preach. And he said that they helped him and encouraged him in that. After the slaves were freed, Isaac Lane realized that if black men were going to be effective speakers and ministers, they needed education. And so he began on his own the Lane Institute.
Which at first was a high school, is that right?
which began as a high school.
Okay.
He came up with the $240 on his own to purchase 4 acres of land and begin the Lane Institute.
Wow.
His daughter Jenny was one of the first teachers. He and his wife raised 11 children. Jenny was one of the first teachers. Within just a few years, they changed it to Lane College, and that's the name that it holds still today. Isaac Lane traveled the country raising funds for that school. He was one of the founders of the CME Church, which was founded right here in Jackson, Tennessee. The Liberty Church in Jackson is called Mother Liberty because it's the mother church of the CME denomination. Isaac also, or Bishop Lane, I think was somewhat of a pragmatist too. He realized that in that day and age, most of the blacks in this area were only one generation removed from slavery. And he needed people who financially could support an institution. And most of them didn't yet have the funds to do that. And so when he named the first president of Lane College, it was not just a white man, it was a white Methodist minister named Reverend T.F. Saunders, who had ridden in the Confederate cavalry with Nathan Bedford Forrest. How ironic a story is that? But I believe that Bishop Lane saw that to make that school be trusted and legitimized by the people who had the money to support it.
He needed that support.
He needed that support.
And the CME Church was blessed by the Methodist Episcopal Church South.
Absolutely.
It wasn't a breakaway.
Absolutely. No, it was not a breakaway. It was a forming together.
He lived over 100 years, died in the 1930s.
Died at age 103.
Great.
At 100, he was still planting his own garden on Hayes Avenue.
He's buried at Riverside Cemetery. How did that happen?
Riverside is not now, nor has it ever been, a segregated cemetery, and that's...
So that became, Hollywood became the segregated
Hollywood
cemetery.
And Mount Olivet, which is on East Forest, were founded about the same time.
Okay.
One was a white cemetery, one was a black cemetery.
So Riverside
But there are other blacks
black
besides the Lane family buried at
there.
Riverside Cemetery.
Okay. Were they servants of or free blacks or what?
The others that I am aware of were servants of the Campbell family.
Okay. But so he was buried there, and obviously that was accepted. He was buried in the city cemetery.
When Bishop Lane died in 1937, I think he was probably one of the most beloved men in Jackson, Tennessee. The mayor and the former mayor both spoke at his funeral.
Okay. One of the story about him is he had bought his father's books because there was not enough money to bury his father, and so that purchase enabled his father to have a funeral.
Correct. He did say he wrote his autobiography in later years, and he said that the only time he was ever almost whipped in his life was by a group of men who were about to whip him when his father rode up and prevented it happening. His father, Cullen Lane, was also the man who owned him when he was a young man. Wow. And when he died after the war, he was broke. And Isaac Lane bought his own father's library to be able to afford a funeral for him.
Fascinating interplay, isn't it?
An unbelievable man. As I said, I think he was the greatest man of vision that's ever lived in this town.
Appreciate this time.
Thank you very much.
Read along with us. He's the historian of Madison County, Tennessee. Facebook, Today in Madison County, Tennessee History. Now you know why. Thanks again.
Thank you, Steve.
Stay with us here at E+ TV 6 because this is the place where the dialogue continues.
That the projections would be tornado next Thursday?
I can't do Thursday, but I can do Friday.
Disasters don't plan ahead. You can. Talk to your loved ones about how you're going to be ready in an emergency.